I'm Jessica Birch from the Corporation for National and Community Service, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. I will be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the webinar, so feel free to enter your questions into the Q&A panel throughout the session. Also joining us are Amy Kanata and Jess Knight from our partners at Education Northwest, who have helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You'll also see them in the chat and Q&A to help address questions you may have during the session. I am also pleased to welcome our guest speakers for today. Our first guest speaker is Ellen Winarzik. Ellen was a VISTA supervisor in Seattle Public Schools, where VISTAs were implementing service learning projects with teachers in schools with high free and reduced lunch student populations. Prior to that, she was the Education Director and Program Officer for the Washington Service Corps in Washington State. She has been training VISTAs and VISTA supervisors across the country for 15 years. We also have with us Lonnie Golston. Lonnie has served as an AmeriCorps VISTA with the Prescott College as the project coordinator for the Yavapai Reentry Project before joining the Corporation for National and Community Service. As a program officer in the Louisiana State Office, she is responsible for identifying and developing community partners, promoting and recognizing programs through social media, and providing support to sponsors and members. Currently, she manages 5 programs, including the state's largest intermediary program. So, session goals. Here is what we hope that you'll get out of this webinar. We hope that you'll be able to learn more about the reasons members leave service early, as well as recognize key factors that impact VISTA retention. We also hope that you learn strategies for energizing your VISTAs and help sustain them throughout their service year. Lastly, but not least, we want you to be able to successfully troubleshoot problems that come up as they occur sooner rather than later. Now I'm going to turn it over to one of our guest speakers, Ellen. Ellen, take it away.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. It's a beautiful day here in Denver, Colorado. It's been a fabulous fall. As you know, I was a VISTA supervisor in a school-based project in Seattle, and I've been working with VISTAs to help them be more effective at their sites and with their supervisors since 2000. I'm also an executive coach for nonprofit leaders and school district leaders. In the slide that you see on the webinar here, you'll see that actually VISTA has a fabulous retention statistic at 83% for all VISTAs who served a full term in 2014. Roughly 2% of VISTAs ended their service early for compelling reasons, such as medical issues, health of a family member, or other types of personal issues that might have been compelling. Approximately, or 15% of VISTAs ended their service for non-compelling reasons, which are things such as they accepted outside employment, or maybe they perhaps ran into some financial hardship. So I thought those would be enlightening for us to start off with, but we understand that even with the best supervision, people still leave, which is out of your control. So we're not here to talk about the things that you can control during the VISTA's term of service. And I'm now going to say something that seems, well, probably pretty obvious, but still very important. There are always circumstances that arrive that you have absolutely no control over. You know, as they say, life happens. Sometimes people get sick, family emergencies arise, and other things happen that are simply out of our control. But many problems arise during a VISTA's term of service that are preventable, and you, the VISTA supervisor, have a considerable amount of control. These are maybe some gray areas where you can actually have a great deal of impact. Things like task relevance, effective communications, recognition, which is what we started the webinar with. So let's see how that works in real life. So we're actually going to take a scenario drawn from some of the VISTA forum entries that occur on the VISTA campus. So Amy, you're going to read the scenario for us if I remember correctly. Why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thanks, Ellen. So speaking in the voice of a VISTA member, here's what we saw posted. She said, I need advice. I'm in a situation where I was misled by my supervisor during the interview about my position. I was assured housing financial assistance, and that never came. And many of my responsibilities that I was supposed to have are not going to manifest. The entire department that I work in seems to be in complete disarray. I'm miserable. When I try to speak to my supervisor about it or to set up a meeting, she either stands mute before me, refusing to speak, or just simply walks away. She doesn't answer any of my questions or emails. She's stopped assigning me work or meeting with me. I'm trying to change my VAD. Since this is up to my supervisor, I feel like I cannot. I'm trapped and struggling. Please help me. I can't tell you how much I regret joining VISTA.
Thanks, Amy. While this may seem like perhaps an extreme articulation of a situation, you can see that this VISTA is experiencing some of the following challenging points represented on the slide here. They feel misled by their interview. There are some missing promises as a result of that. There are less than ideal communications with the supervisor, such that the supervisor doesn't answer emails, or perhaps just doesn't communicate well in person. There's minimal or no feedback on written assignments from the supervisor. The supervisor stopped assigning some of the work. There seems to be a somewhat disorganized department or unit, and unfortunately the VISTA strongly regrets becoming a VISTA. So here's where we'd like to draw you into the conversation. On the chat, we'd like you to enter your ideas into the chat box and make sure you send to all participants. We'd love to hear your comments to be visible to everyone, so please be sure to enter them in the chat panel, and then Jessica will read some of them aloud so that we'll all be able to hear them. Make sure that you do not enter into the Q&A panel further down the screen. So in your chat area, share your thoughts on what some of those preventions might be. Jessica, do we have any that might be available?
Thanks, Ellen. So we have a few coming in here. They're coming in rapid fire. So let's see. Some of the supervisors here have said, be upfront in the recruitment process about what VISTA is. Also, the supervisor should have been open and honest about the duties required and the benefits available. Another suggestion was to implement weekly check-in meetings, have a written policy of all benefits handed to the VISTA at the very beginning. Those are good. Honesty during the interview. Open communication is always key. Clear expectations, stronger VAD activities. These are fantastic. Also, regular scheduled supervision times, kind of like those regular check-in meetings. Also, that the supervisor taking time to be invested in the VISTA. That's along with communication and being upfront. And let's take a look here as more come in. Another good one, carefully go over the VAD and provide an effective orientation. Explain the situation if something has changed. That means no housing assistance is available. That's great. So if something changed recently and you promised, it was said that you would get housing assistance, but that can no longer be provided, definitely make sure that VISTA is aware of that. Also, set some concrete goals and tasks together. It's definitely a good time at the beginning of service to sit down with the VISTAs and really set something in motion. And I love this one. We'll have this one as our last one. Clarify and revise any needed VAD adjustments. Treat VISTAs like gold. So with that, Ellen, I'll turn it back over to you.
That was great, Jessica. Thanks for finishing on that. I love treat them like gold. They were all fabulous. Thank you, everyone, for contributing. And they were terrific preventions and some interventions that certainly have happened in the VISTA projects that I've had some ability to be able to participate and have some dialogue in. But let's talk about, let's talk about the next piece. What are some of the, or rather, I'm sorry, I got a little confused there. Let's go to the next slide and talk about some of the interventions you might have. Oh, sorry, Jessica, I got a little confused there. Are there any other interventions that have occurred in some of the chat that you saw?
Yeah, it looks like we got these all intermingled, so that's great. As someone said here, I really liked what someone put here that it create a space for feedback. I think definitely making sure that that's open is definitely an intervention in making sure that the VISTA knows they can come to you to discuss those sorts of things. And let's take a look here. Also, if there's a reason that the position changed, tell the VISTA what they are so that they don't feel misled. It's great. Kind of along with if the housing assistance is no longer available, making sure that they know that if something's changed in the position, that that communication is open and clear. Someone also said in here that does the VISTA have a VISTA leader? Maybe having a third party involved will open a line of communication. So that's also another way for those projects that have VISTA leaders. Having all those things involved and all those different preventions and interventions. So Ellen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jessica. Terrific interventions, and I love how we can talk about things that we can do on the front end before or just when the VISTA gets there, and never forget to intervene if things are perhaps not going the way they could. Now we're going to move off into what are some factors that we can do that will actually retain a VISTA. And these factors can and should be translated literally into specific actions on your part as supervisors. Whether you're working in a role directly with VISTAs or managing perhaps a larger VISTA project with multiple VISTAs, you all play a vital and pivotal role in keeping VISTAs informed, motivated, and energized. Let's explore these 5 factors a little bit more in depth, and we'd love to bring Lonnie back to begin sharing some of her experiences and insights on recruiting the right person. That's the first factor. Lonnie, do you want to jump in?
Hi, everyone. Again, this is Lonnie calling from the Baton Rouge office with the Corporation for National and Community Service. I have a background in managing programs, recruiting, and then also providing legal services for underserved communities, which is actually what led to my VISTA year after I finished up law school. I'm now entering my 2nd year as a program officer with the state office, and I have to say, not only am I always very impressed with the great work that our VISTA members do here in the Bayou State, but just looking at a lot of the comments and feedback, I think we've got some great supervisors on here. Some of this might seem a little repetitive, but we're hoping to get in a little more detail to give some better ideas of how to implement some of these things. So with that, we'll start off with recruiting the right person. And recruiting is so important because it really lays the foundation, as we saw in the example. So you really want to make sure you're selecting the right person. You can have someone who is a good match and maybe looks good on paper for what you need and what their skills are, but that's very different from getting a person who is a right fit for the actual organization. So we really do want to look for that entire package. I do remember seeing this in the comments, but when you're interviewing, it's okay to share the VAD and the agency mission. It's a great thing to include in either the first or the second round, and it sets real expectations. It allows the parties to identify if this is a good fit for them, or if it's an organization with multiple VISTA placements, if there might be another position within the organization for which they're better suited. It's also very important to communicate realistic expectations. It's very easy to get excited about having the VISTA on board and the great things an agency is doing, but we want to make sure everyone has a realistic goal and expectation. This is so important because it kind of ties into overselling the position, which we almost always tend to do when we're really excited about something. However, if there's a realistic expectation and it's a reasonable one, it can really help alleviate the stress that's associated with transitioning into a new position for a VISTA. It can also help avoid early burnout and frustrations in those first 3 months when we often see VISTAs leaving. It's also important to pay attention to personal competencies and workspace dynamics. Again, this kind of ties to the right fit for the job versus a good match for the position. Characteristics such as integrity, a willingness to learn or be a team player, flexibility, those are things that we learn over time, and they're hard to teach within that 1-year term. Skills can be learned on the job and with training, but you really want to try and find someone who has those interpersonal skills and those intangibles that you can't necessarily teach. It's also important that as supervisors we consider, are we looking for a cross-functional team where everyone has their own separate position, but they work together, or are all of the VISTA members working separately on their own independent projects, because that will change the dynamics as well. It's also good to have a reflective moment before you bring in someone and think about what is your management style. If you're someone who really likes to micromanage and be in on all of the details or all of the details for a specific project, hiring a self-starter, while not impossible to do, is something that you might want to refrain from doing, or really think about what is that middle ground in giving them some independence but making sure you're still in the know for everything. If you know that you don't really have time for detailed supervision, and we do see this where the site supervisors are very busy or do a lot of remote work, hiring someone who needs a lot of intensive instruction and coaching might not be the best fit, because it can result in, again, those mixed-match expectations and frustrations. Finally, we really want to look at the service outlook for the applicant versus are they just looking for a job. It's really okay to ask someone if they think they would leave for a job during the recruiting process. For a personal example, when I applied for my position, they said, well, you have a law degree. Are you going to leave if a law firm calls? And the most important thing that you can do is explain why you're asking that question, whether it's, we're working on a big project and we really want someone who's going to buy in and stay, or in the past, working in a rural setting has been a challenge. What are those easy things that might lead you away? It's okay to ask those, and the VISTA might, or the applicant might say that they need time to think about it, but especially now that we have more high-valued background positions with STEM and with various other programs, sometimes it's important to ask that question so that you set both yourself and the VISTA up for success. You also want to try and find someone who sees the service as the end, as well as an opportunity for self-development versus, is this a job, is this going to help me with getting to med school? Like, the goal should actually be what you're doing there for the community. And as most of you hopefully know, we recently changed the outside employment policy. So if making a little extra money on the side will make it easier for a member to serve, remember that they are allowed to serve part-time outside as long as it doesn't conflict with the project and it's been approved by you as the supervisor. Now, the next thing that you might be thinking is, well, once we find the right person, how do we get a solid foundation from the start? So to create a solid foundation up front, there are 3 things that can really help make a difference. We've touched on this a little bit earlier, but communicating expectations regarding the VAD. It's always important to have very clear and direct communication, especially in the early stages when everyone is still learning each other, and especially when you're recruiting someone who's maybe not in that community to begin with. You want to communicate the goals, but you also might need to communicate the specific task that you anticipate or that you need to achieve them. The reason for this is twofold. A member might be interested in outreach but have it in a very different setting or capacity, and they don't know how to do volunteer recruitment. Maybe they're more of a partnership builder. So you have to make sure that everyone is thinking of outreach in the same way. You also will sometimes see that a member has skills that are maybe above and beyond what's actually been listed in the VAD, but when you see this, don't feel like you have to suddenly change the VAD or give them extra duties for those extra skills they have. It's important to sit down and assess how those skills could be assets and then empower the VISTA member to collaborate with the team or with you to identify additional projects, but only where you see appropriate. If you know that there are 5 crucial things that need to happen in that year and you think that their big idea might not align, it's still a good opportunity to sit down and figure out what you can do. But you always want to make sure that everyone's needs are being met and that you're energizing and keeping your VISTA goal-oriented and very engaged and involved. A good example of this is you might recruit a VISTA that has great skills in marketing and outreach. They might believe that this is a direct tie to fundraising and have a background in fundraising. So what are some projects that could align with a VAD where the outreach is more focused on volunteer recruitment that you can find as a middle ground and give the VISTA member a greater sense of ownership in their duties? The next thing that is important to help create a solid foundation is explain the workplace environment and the community cultures. Make sure the VISTA understands what the office policies are. Some of this might seem second nature to us, but we are working with a lot of individuals who might come straight out of undergrad, and so they haven't maybe had as much work. And so what you'll want to do is make sure they understand, is it business casual? Does everyone wear a suit every day? What is the internet use policy? Also, is there a standard routine or different policies and just polite niceties that you use within the office? Also, be cognizant of the information in the member's application and determine how much experience they even have in that type of setting. They might need extra guidance in navigating office politics and recognizing how to fit into an organization. For those of you who are in rural settings or very urban settings, this is very important to consider, especially again when you are bringing people from across the country. If they've never lived in a rural setting before, not having access to public transportation or a Whole Foods right around the corner is going to be a change that you may not even consider. So those are really important things to think about when you're recruiting, because they are all going to be part of the VISTA member's transition. Finally, it's important to look at the sponsor and the sub-site communication when you are in an intermediary setting. This is very critical, but it's often missing. Strong communication with your sub-site and their supervisors will really help you be tuned into what is going on, not only with the sub-site and any issues and support they may need, but also directly ties to their ability to support and host that VISTA member. You want to make sure that you have consistency in messaging to your sites, and you want to make sure that you have a good standard interview process for bringing in the new sites, and make sure that you're reviewing and being copied on the communications. So that's a lot, but like I said, based off the comments I saw, it looks like a lot of you are already on the right track. So now we're going to kick it back over to Ellen about our third factor for retention.
Thanks, Lonnie. I appreciate it. The third factor we're going to talk about is always remembering to inspire. For those of you who've done any leadership training, inspiration is a really important thing for one's leader or supervisor to do with their VISTA. So connecting the VAD, which can be the details of what a VISTA may be doing within their project, to the larger vision and inspiring your VISTAs on a continual basis is something that can be very, very important to do. In my VISTA project, when I was supervising, I had standing Friday meetings with my VISTAs, and a small part of that would always be inspiring them to remember the bigger vision, but also connecting some of their smaller detail things and reminding them of how those smaller detail parts of what they were accomplishing in their VAD was rolling up into contributing to the bigger vision. So lighting a fire is a constant endeavor, and keeping the bigger picture in mind sometimes needs to is left to the supervisor to be reminded to the VISTA. So put the VAD into that larger context to make a good connection to what the VISTA is doing in terms of understanding their outcome when they finish. Maintaining that thread is really important. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that they feel like they're contributing all the time and that they're really making a difference. And we know what that can be like sometimes in our positions. It's sometimes we get lost in the minutia of things, and it's hard to keep interest or understand how those details do roll up. So having someone like you, the supervisor, helps to provide that passion and that continual connection to the dream that's really important. For me, that's a pretty easy thing to do. I like keeping the bigger picture in mind. That's not what everybody does easily. So if that's something that you have to remember, you can ask questions and have the VISTA help you remember also what that bigger picture is as well. And that way you can work together to keep everything on track. Our second point is about providing insights about the pace of community change, which is oftentimes slower than what a VISTA, or maybe you, want it to be. And for somebody who may be a bit more experienced around community change, you may have experienced that yourself and you understand that in moving with multiple constituencies, perhaps in diverse communities. But for somebody who's a little bit earlier in their career, which some of our VISTAs or many of our VISTAs are, they might not realize or have experienced yet how slow community change can feel or actually be. So if VISTAs are often impatient, they may also lack the clarity in understanding why it takes so long for communities to change, and you can help provide some perspective to them. That's a fabulous role for a VISTA supervisor to remember. Again, back to my project, I worked in a school district, in a school district, and while a school year seems to go pretty fast, changing some of the systems and structures or even how teachers do their work can take a longer period of time. So reaffirm to the VISTA that they're there to build capacity and that they're a helpmate in the process. And sometimes they have to be the continual reminder that change is happening as opposed to being the answer to what that change might be. Lastly, I wanted to add that if you haven't done this activity, you and the VISTA can do an activity together to get on the same page about how to effectively implement the project. And while it's a fabulous thing to do right at the beginning, perhaps as a part of on-site orientation and training, it's also a terrific thing to do anytime during the VISTA's term of service to collectively draw together a picture of what the project or the term at the end of the term, what the project will look like when completed, what the outcomes might look like, what the results might look like. So the VISTA activity, which Amy is going to post to the chat, and it's on the VISTA campus, and I'll encapsulate it briefly here. Project supervisor, you can draw first, and I do mean draw, even with stick figures or star people, which is what I use, what the end of the project looks like in mind. And then you can explain it to the VISTA, or you can ask the invite the VISTA to ask questions about your vision. And then after that, you can have the VISTA draw, based on how they've read their VAD, what they believe the VISTA vision is for their term of service, and have them explain it to you. And then collaboratively, you can discuss where the points where you meet, or where do you need to make some bridges, or where do we need to make some, if you're in the middle of a term of service, some midterm corrections about what that VISTA or what those activities might be. So it's a fabulous activity actually to do any time during your VISTA, the VISTA's term of service. So I hope you find that handout helpful if that's something that might move you down the pathway to further inspire VISTAs to the larger vision. Lonnie, I'm going to pass it back to you, and you're going to take it on to point number 4.
Thanks, Ellen. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about establishing and maintaining communication, which is, as I'm sure we can all agree, vital no matter what you're doing, but especially when we're working with VISTAs. So the fourth factor, establishing and maintaining communication, one of the first things you want to consider is setting up initial and regular or ongoing meetings. And I think some of you alluded to this earlier when we were asking about interventions and ways to help avoid the situation that we saw. These are so important because they give you a chance to ensure that the member is going in the right direction, but it also gives the member an avenue for regular feedback. When we engage the VISTA members through regular reporting, touch bases, or meetings, it gives them a chance to discuss how they see their progress and also an opportunity for you to share how you're seeing it. This is a great way to provide a sense of accomplishment, especially if you have a program that's very long-term and the VISTA is maybe used to seeing rapid results, or they're getting discouraged because they aren't seeing any results. This is also a great opportunity to identify any roadblocks that the member might be experiencing and help them find a way to resolve it or an alternative way to go about achieving whatever it is they're working on. Finally, like I mentioned earlier, this is a great opportunity to recognize their accomplishments and keep motivations up. I think I saw earlier in the comments that one of the programs does a potluck and brings all of the VISTA members together. I was at a similar program, and I think this is a great way to engage the VISTAs and then to take part of that time to recognize the different great things that they're accomplishing and they're doing, especially while they're all together. When you meet with the VISTA member, it's also a great and appropriate time to give an opportunity to view the VAD and look at it and see if it needs to be updated, if it should be revised, ultimately to look at it as a living document. The needs that you may have had as an organization when you were recruiting versus the needs 6 months into a VISTA member service may change, and so not locking them into a document from the very beginning is okay, and having those regular touch bases give you a great opportunity to kind of find out what they're seeing maybe doesn't work as well as you'd thought and how you can tailor it to get the same end goal and result, but maybe in a better or more effective way. Another thing that we want to do when we're talking about communication is provide personalized support and feedback. Ask specific questions about the activities the member's been working on. Make them open-ended so that it can lead to a thoughtful conversation and discussion about their efforts. If your project has a VISTA leader, regular conversations with the leader and the member can really give you a more well-rounded view of any concerns or areas that might need to be addressed. Oftentimes, the VISTA leader, since they're kind of a third party, they can be perceived as a more safe space to open up about different things that a VISTA member might be experiencing, and that's largely what they're there for. And so you really want to take advantage of the opportunity that the VISTA leader has with the members to kind of find out what are things that maybe the program can be doing to support the VISTA members more, and to make sure that the resources are available. Also, you know, it's what they say about integrity. You're as good as you are, you're only as good as you are and as good as your word is. So you really want to stick to your commitments. If on the application that you've submitted for the project or that a sub-site has, you've identified that you are going to regularly meet with the VISTA bi-monthly, weekly, whatever the case may be, make sure you're following through with that and make sure your sub-sites are following through with their commitment as well. All it takes is getting a little bit too busy, which we've all been there before, but getting caught up in a particular project, and you put off one meeting, and then before you know, maybe it's been a second meeting. And this is where that dissatisfaction can really start to creep up because the VISTA member feels like they maybe don't have the support or they don't have the outlet. If you are at a project with multiple sites or with intermediate or sub-sites, you want to make sure that they have that commitment and that they're following through with it and that they are also following up with the VISTA member. So it's not just you as the primary site and then your subs, but then also their communication and your communication with that VISTA member there as well, because there might be something that they're butting heads about, if you will, but they'll have very different perspectives on the why or the what, and being in regular communication with all of the parties can really help find resolution to those issues quicker. So now, let's define what communication looks like via chat. Over to you, Ellen.
Thanks, Lonnie. So back to chat. I think it's always fabulous to hear what everyone from out or across the country has to say. What do regular communications and supervising maintenance activities look like in your neck of the woods? So please enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure, again, that you respond to all participants. And when we get a few more added in, Jessica is going to take a readout of where some of the comments that you have submitted as they appear on the chat. So Jessica, how are we doing? Do we have a couple of chat comments that we can read out?
Definitely, yeah. So thank you, Ellen. So, so what are some regular communications? We have here a lot of weekly meetings, also regular review of the VAD and check-ins. I think that's really good to make sure you know, you're reviewing the VAD activities and the results as those come in. Also, along with the weekly check-ins, online office hours. And quarterly site visits. So definitely if you're an intermediary or if there's multi-sites, being able to actually check into those sites every now and then is always good. Also, weekly one-on-one meetings where VISTA can take ownership over the agenda and the supervisor can provide feedback and professional development opportunities. That's fantastic, definitely giving them the reins to take over that agenda and also providing them additional opportunities. Another suggestion or another activity that, that a supervisor does is that they meet monthly for member support meetings and separately for monthly trainings. They want to connect with the person at least 2 times a month, and they send over monthly emails to supervisors for scheduling, and they conduct biannual site visits. So it sounds like you have a good schedule going there. A lot of, you know, the regular maintenance, monthly check-ins, weekly check-ins, also having the supervisor be accessible, whether that's in person, via email, or over the phone. Let's see. Just checking in with the VISTAs one-on-one weekly to ask about given projects, a more formal check-in every 2 to 3 months about their experience as a whole, and monthly team meetings to discuss projects and upcoming events. That's a great way to structure it as well, you know, one-on-one, like how's it going, more formal every 2 to 3 months about the experience as a whole, and then monthly team meetings to just kind of see the status. Yeah, and so quarterly site visits. Yeah, a lot of these are on the same, you know, doing those regular meetings. Yeah, providing written and formal updates and feedback. I definitely think supervisors are on the right track here. So, Ellen, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jessica. Well, what's interesting is in a recent, or the latest findings from a VISTA member survey that JBS International has done for the corporation, this is what they found around communication, is that one-on-one meetings, 88% of VISTAs in this sample meet regularly with their supervisor. Yay! And 64% meet 1 or more times a week. So I'm sure that really helps in their communications. And as far as group meetings go, 78% meet in a group with their supervisor, and 55% meet 1 or more times a week, again, in a group, which is terrific. VISTAs need and want your support to help them keep the vision in mind, guide their VAD activities, or maybe even advise them on how to approach some of their VAD activities, and give them some good guidance to be able to ensure that they get the results that you want and that they want. So we, too, came up with some regular communications, just in case you didn't add anything to the chat, but we knew you would. And just to verify, you all said one-on-one meetings. That definitely came up in the chat comments. Weekly reports and having feedback came up as well. And I'm sure some of those one-on-one meetings, I know in my project, sometimes they were phone calls. And nowadays, are we tapping into all of the technology at our availability? Are you using texting as possible ways to do updates? I had a regular email update on Friday. It was the Friday email report for my project. So maybe there's some technology tap-ins that you can do to be able to continue the regular communications with your VISTAs. So we're going to jump into the 5th intervention that we could have for ensuring that there's good communications here, and that is troubleshoot problems as they arise. And we want to try and nip them in the bud as best as possible. And I don't know about you, but I know conflict is difficult for many people to deal with and work through. But in my experience, getting through difficult conversations or possible conflicts ultimately can build stronger bonds in the long run. And I think that's really what helps to make the VISTA project successful and for the VISTA to have a successful experience. So everybody has a different style of dealing with conflicts or handling conflicts. Some people can be overly accommodating, some people can become abrupt or even aggressive, and some people can even become reclusive. But it's really helpful if you talk about how to handle conflicts during your on-site orientation, or better yet, if you haven't had that conversation, do it now. It's a conversation that usually yields terrific learning for both you as a supervisor and for the VISTA. Conflict doesn't have to be scary, and it can lead to some positive outcomes as opposed to some bad conclusions. It's better to be, I think one of the VISTAs, or one of the supervisors in the chat said honest communications, and that's what we really want to foster, is honest communication so that bad conclusions might not occur. Preventing and planning ahead in dealing with conflict is a good strategy. Truth be told, you are going to have conflict. I bet if people were to add pieces onto the chat, I bet we'd hear many of you say, yes, conflict has happened, and I'm hoping that you have had some positive results that have occurred out of dealing with conflict effectively. When you deal with it effectively, you can have stronger bonds and better trust to continue in your working relationships. So understanding how you approach conflict on the front end and how you handle it when you're in it can be a good, honest communication to have at any time during the VISTA project. So I'm going to pass this off to Lonnie, who has a few more insights to share about the types of problems that might come up.
Thanks, Ellen. So briefly, I'm going to go over some typical problems that you'll see arise when working with communicating and retaining the VISTAs. One, which you're probably starting to notice a theme, is that there's a lack of clarity in the communication somewhere, usually on the task or the tasks needed for achievement. Essentially, some VISTAs need to know not just the what, but the why. They might need to understand why that task is chosen to better appreciate the big picture, or just to understand the inner workings of an institution and why certain processes are followed. Another instance or issue that we often see is that the staff or other members on the team don't really understand what a VISTA member's responsibilities are, or they don't understand the difference between direct service. So while you might be the person actually supervising the VISTA directly, but more than likely there are other staff members who will come in contact with or work on projects involving or engaging your VISTA. Making sure that the staff has a clear understanding of what the purpose of a VISTA member is and what they'll be doing with the organization can really help ensure that everyone is on the same page when it comes to the expectations for the position. So I know you all already know the VISTA member shouldn't be doing administrative duties, answering the phones. But if you're in a small nonprofit, sometimes what we see is everyone has a day that they're supposed to answer the phones or do the mail. That's not really where the VISTA member's time should be going. So it's really setting out those guidelines and making that very clear at the beginning to help avoid any tensions later on. Other things that we'll sometimes see is, again, overselling the area in recruitment. You can oversell a position, but you can also oversell an area. We do want to paint a clear picture to the VISTA member of where they'll be serving. Case in point, I was in Prescott, Arizona, and I made the comment of having grown up in Phoenix, and someone said, well, this is high desert, and it's definitely not Phoenix. It's okay to kind of realign or shift a member or an applicant's expectations so that they know they're not going to be in the city, they might be in the suburbs, or they just might be in an area that's very different from something that they've experienced or worked in before. So an example of a typical problem that may come up and troubleshooting it in real time, we have seen a lack of communication or conflict phobia, as I like to call it, when dealing with sub-sites or with intermediary sites. So sometimes you'll have a VISTA who needs to have a deferred start, but all of the details of what is required and the timelines aren't necessarily clearly communicated between a sub-site and the actual grantee and intermediary. Now, if this is caught early, the issue can be alleviated. But if the supervisor and member find themselves frustrated because they don't know their status, so if they're left in the dark, it can really make both of those parties even more frustrated. When it is caught early, as we've seen it more often than not, it's definitely fixable, but the lack of communication between the parties could have resulted in a VISTA member not receiving their pay or having a bad impression of either the site or of the grantee right at the beginning of their service. So all of those different levels of communication are so vital and crucial to the transition and the recruiting process. So what should you do when you're trying to troubleshoot problems? Be proactive. No one likes confrontation for the most part, but at the end of the day, if we're proactive in trying to resolve problems as soon as they arise, everyone sees that there's a goal being worked towards that everyone can buy into, which is making the situation better. So communicate with the problem. You'll have to wade through some of the emotional words of hurt or frustration to find the true issue that's causing the problem. Sometimes, as supervisors, especially those of you with lots of experience, you might actually have to get the VISTA to open up about their emotions because they might be holding and bottling a lot of stuff in. A lot of our job is to figure out, is this a personal disconnect or is it a process disconnect, but then also find out where the hurt is coming from, but then also separate that from the actual problem itself. And sometimes you might need to work through both of those. Regular check-ins, which it sounds like most everyone is doing given that 88% weekly check-in number, but those regular check-ins are also a great opportunity to get a temperature read for the VISTA on how they're doing emotionally and personally. It can also help detect some issues early on, as opposed to the VISTA feeling like these are only for work and how is your progress coming. Make sure you know that this is also a safe space for them to talk about how they're doing. Are they adjusting well? Are they homesick? What are the different supports that you can help direct them to so that they feel supported and they don't start to feel that frustration and want to leave? Also, and sometimes this is hard, especially when you're really in the thick of it, is determining what can be repaired and what cannot. Especially if you are working with intermediaries, there's only so much you can tell them to do as far as the sub-sites are concerned. So you might have to say, what can we do to make this the best experience, knowing that these are the parameters that we're working within. And those are hard conversations to have sometimes, and that's how you sometimes do end up with those 15% who leave for non-compelling reasons. But as a supervisor, especially if you're supervising multiple participants, you do have to be able to recognize what is salvageable, what is not, but then what are some reasonable alternatives going forward. So those are just some things to consider when you're troubleshooting problems as they arise. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ellen, who's going to share some resources and some next steps.
Great, thanks, Lonnie. It's always terrific to have a couple of resources available, and one of them can be found, and I think Amy is going to put this up in the chat, is a Managing Conflict, a resource guide for VISTAs and leaders. And it talks a little bit about what is conflict, stages of conflict, why conflict is so hard, and some common approaches that this group of VISTAs and leaders put together in this document and came up with some products for us. So hopefully that will be a tool that might be of use and helpful to you. If you've never heard of or taken the Thomas Kilmann Conflict Mode assessment, Google it, and it assigns folks after taking a brief survey to one of 5 different styles: competing, collaborating, compromising, accommodating, or avoiding. But hopefully those resources will be very helpful for you if you have to sort through some of the challenges that conflict can bring at your sites. Let's go to the next slide. And there are also some places where your VISTA can get connected, and you can help them get connected if they're feeling alone or disconnected from others or their work. And that certainly can contribute to a discomforting or a difficult feeling like that we heard in the scenario that Amy had read. You can support them by steering them towards opportunities to get them more involved with the larger service community. You can send them to the Connect and Learn section of the VISTA campus. There they will find VISTA forums, access to social media sites, a VISTA map where other VISTA members are around the country, and information about possible meetups in their area. We also offer 2 webinars per month for members, and that's through the Education Northwest and the corporation. You can let your VISTAs know about the November 12th Avoiding Burnout During Service webinar. I think Amy just put that link up on the registration, link to the registration page up on the chat. So those are some terrific resources and can be a great outlet and opportunity for VISTAs to stay connected to the larger service community. Okay, so now let's just talk about a couple of next steps as we sort of wind towards the end of our webinar. We've given you a lot of information, and there's no time like the present to take action. Really, just because you haven't done it during on-site orientation doesn't mean that you can't take action right now. There are things that you can do to change the current situation if you have found out that the situation isn't perhaps where you or your VISTA would like it to be. Get to know your VISTA and determine what their needs are and be honest and realistic about what you can and cannot do. Reconnect members with the VISTA mission. You can discuss some of the different conflict styles that may exist for you and for perhaps the VISTA. Regularly communicate via text, email, phone call, chat, or meetings. Have that difficult conversation. Clear the air. Try not to put it off. Just take the right step forward. Regularly praise your VISTA. Again, at the beginning of the webinar, everybody shared some terrific ways in which they recognize their VISTAs. But be authentic. Make sure you're honest and clear, and that often goes a long way. So praise them often and frequently is what I like to say. So let's go to one more quick chat here as we start to wind down in terms of taking action. You can change the slide, and then we'll talk about listing one more thing you plan to try or implement.
Thanks, Ellen. Everyone, this is
today.
Oh,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Jessica.
Sorry, no, you're fine. Sorry about that, Ellen. Thanks, everybody. So we do want to hear some things for you to list that you plan to try to implement based on what you learned today. We also want to be respectful of your time. We know we're right at 3 o'clock Eastern time, and so we do understand that you guys are busy. For those of you who can stay, we will be having a Q&A session. So please, for those of you who can stay and have questions, please go ahead and stay. But for those of you who can't, please know that this will be recorded, so you can always listen to those chat questions and always go back to this webinar after the fact. If you do need to leave, we do just want to point you to the evaluation that is coming up on your right-hand side. We do take your thoughts, your feedback into consideration, so please complete that for us so we can improve these for you. Going to the chat, based on what things are you planning on doing after this, so they're going to do some supervisors here said that they're going to do getting on the same page activity that you mentioned earlier. That's a great way to make sure your visions are lining up. Also helping VISTAs connect to the bigger mission of national service. Really taking them back to the roots of what VISTA is, I think is a great way to get them more in line with the national service community. Also, someone here is going to put on their calendar the date for our next 2 to 3 month check-in. So someone's going to go ahead and do that right now, which is great. And also the realistic expectations of community change. That was a great thing that was touched on. As we say, VISTA is, you might not see the change right away, but over time you can see change. So definitely giving that realistic expectation to those VISTAs. And we'll end with this one, that helping VISTAs connect with the organization. So definitely making sure your VISTAs feel a part of your community as an organization, as well as the community that they're serving in, is very important. So those are some great next steps. I'm sure you have many more that can't be documented here on this chat, but we do appreciate that. So as I mentioned, there is a poll on the right-hand side of your screen. If you can take that, that would be great. And now we're going to start into the Q&A session for those of you who can stay. We definitely want to answer those questions for you. So I am going to ask the operator to let us know how to ask questions by phone, and we'll go from there. So operator, are you there?
Yes, thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name clearly.
Great. So while we wait for some questions to come in over the phone, I was monitoring the Q&A as we were going. And a great question here just came up. So I'm going to, Ellen and Lonnie, this one's for you guys. I'm not sure who wants to take this one, but a great question came in around conflict. So how do you come back from conflict that hasn't been handled well? So we talk about how to handle that conflict well, but what if the initial conflict didn't come out, that situation didn't come out well? How do you come back from that with that VISTA member?
Lonnie, do you want me to jump in, or do you want to jump in? Okay, I'll give it a go. First of all, I would highly recommend acknowledging that it didn't go well. That goes a long way towards if there's any healing that might need to occur or happen. But it can be very refreshing to say, wow, that wasn't easy, that didn't go well. Another thing that you can do is you can do some takeaways, some learnings. And you can also and you can do that in the moment or have a conversation about that, but you can also reschedule to have another meeting if there are any other takeaways or residual comments that people may wish to share. Oftentimes with difficult conflict conversations, people just need to go away from it for a while and just think and ponder on it. So it is a good opportunity to take some space so that people can rethink or rephrase or reframe how that conflict went for them. Last but not least, if you and your VISTA were in that conflict, you might have another trusted colleague check in with that VISTA to see where they're at. So that's another possibility that you could use if conflict didn't go well. I hope that answers our viewer's question, our questioner.
Thank you, Ellen. That's fantastic. So this next question, this also came into the chat. I'm going to send this one over to Lonnie. So Lonnie, what types of interview questions can gauge an applicant's ability to work independently? A lot of great suggestions came in from fellow supervisors in the chat, but I'm wondering, from your experience, how would you gauge that, since we talked about the micromanager versus someone who is looking for someone who's more of a self-starter?
What I've found has been, in all of my previous careers as well, a great indicator of someone's comfort with working independently is asking them a lot of introspective questions. So, even though it seems innocuous, what drew you to this picture, to this position? And I'm sorry, my other line is ringing in. What drew you to this? Another thing that you can ask is, the obvious ones. Tell me about a time that you independently managed this. But you can also ask them to, for instance, visualize and then share with you their ideal office setting, because that will be very telling. They'll have either had some type of work experience before or something that they've observed, and they will say, I really like that my supervisor gave me the freedom to do this. Conversely, you can also ask, tell me about a work experience that you've had or a project that you've managed and worked on that made you uncomfortable. Because again, what you might find is, I had a supervisor who was only in the office once a week, and I didn't feel like I had a lot of guidance. And so then that person, they clearly want the guidance, or they need some more regular check-in. So there are a lot of, those are examples of the questions that I generally use when I'm recruiting for various things, and that I've used when hiring a team of my own. And then the other thing is you can always follow up. Like if you kind of are having a hard time gauging from that one interview, my experience with this agency and with programs is that most people do at least a second round. Find out more from that sub-site or that site supervisor. When they say I need someone who works independently, what does that really look like? And you can send some more narrowly tailored follow-up questions. So if the sub-site supervisor says, oh, I'm always available via phone and via email, I'm just not in the office, you can follow up and say, how do you feel about working with someone who works remotely frequently but might not be in person to speak with you? And you might have someone say, I really prefer in-person conversation because email is hard to read. Phone, if I have several questions back to back, I can't get a real-time response. But you might find out that someone's fine with having the open line. They just want to have some of that freedom. So really kind of gauging them and asking them about where they feel like they excel, and then also those work settings where they find themselves often struggling.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lonnie. So I'm going to go back to the operator and see if there are any questions over the phone. Operator, do we have anyone on the phone?
I show no questions.
All right. So we had another question here come in. This is, let me see, I'm going to post this one to Ellen, and then Lonnie, if you have any suggestions as well. Someone here put, any suggestions for communicating with VISTA members who may struggle in face-to-face meetings? As we get more and more into the technological age, sometimes that's not someone's most preferred method of communicating. So is there any tips or anything that, that you can provide, any feedback to this question?
Well, off the top of my head, I mean, face-to-face meetings in a work setting are our minimum, our competency. So I would imagine if you encountered a VISTA who didn't have that competency, this was your opportunity to help them to develop that. And I would talk openly and honestly about that with them and balancing both electronic communications and face-to-face meetings. And it strikes me that the person who might not like face-to-face meetings, they could be highly introverted and gather energy by being from themselves. So you definitely wanted to plan ahead so that person has good information and good knowledge about what a face-to-face meeting might look like, what the agenda might be, how much they would be expected to participate or talk during that meeting, or if they're giving a presentation that they have to be very, very well prepared. So I would not acquiesce at all to, oh, okay, because you like communicating by text or by email, that those are the only ways that you can communicate with me. I would help them expand that competency in themselves so that they can be successful in their future work environment as well. Lonnie, do you have anything you might add?
That was great, Ellen. One thing, especially as someone who, though it might not seem like it right now, is very introverted and very content to work in a box with no one in there for weeks on end. A lot of times, if you listen to that VISTA to get a better gauge of what their anxiety is, I try to operate most things where I'm in a management capacity with the LEAF rule, so listen to where the angst or anxiety comes from or what the problem is, and then empathize with it, because we've all had that thing that we're uncomfortable with that we know we need to overcome, but we don't necessarily know how to ask for help or get it, and then act. So one of the great things about VISTA is that it does have a professional and personal development component to it. So it's okay to ask the VISTA member, you know, what is your reservation or your concern, or what makes it so uncomfortable for you, and how can I as a supervisor help you grow in that way? Because then it's an opportunity for you to show that I'm trying to learn how to grow to best make this experience positive for you. And then incorporate that into your regular follow-up. So, you know, with the LEAF, you have your listen, you empathize, you've put together an action plan, and then you're going to follow up with them. How are we doing just on this one thing? We're not talking about the bad today. We're not talking about on-site today. We're talking about how you're feeling with having more interactions either with stakeholders, with donors, with the volunteers that you're training, and with me with those face-to-face, in-person interactions. And I think if you do that in conjunction with what Ellen mentioned, which is planning ahead, because people like to have an idea of what they're getting into or what they're expected to know when they get to that meeting. And I think if you put those two pieces together, it can really help someone who would prefer to just hide behind email become more comfortable with that basic day-to-day interaction.
Great. Thank you both, Ellen and Lonnie. I'm going to go back to the operator. Do we have any calls over the phone or any questions over the phone?
No questions.
Okay, great. So we do have two last questions here that came in. This first one is, as we mentioned earlier, sometimes VISTAs leave due to a financial hardship. Lonnie, you as a state office individual, you work with a bunch of different supervisors. How do you suggest that they support their VISTAs when there is a financial crisis, or are there ways that they can give advice on how to prepare for certain things that may come up?
First, I would definitely say this is kind of when we're making sure we don't oversell a position or any expectations. Be honest about what that living stipend is going to actually look like depending on where you're going. Because if a VISTA says, oh, I think I can live off that based off of X, Y, and Z, but they have no idea that there isn't really apartment housing, it will be hard to find roommates because of, you know, the way that the community is set up. If it's rural and very spread out, in the driving might be an issue, and so they need to be more centrally located. Be honest about those things. Let them know, you know, your stipend amount in New Orleans is $973. That's not going to get you many places unless you are willing to have at least two to three roommates. But that's just kind of something that if you give them that heads up on the front end, they can plan for it. And it also helps them gauge, is this going to work out for them with where they are financially. The other thing is, I'm pretty sure I've seen come across my desk that there are some VISTA campus trainings on budgeting for your service year. So if you're a program that plans and does your recruiting closer to the 90, 120 days out, if you find a great candidate at day 95, let them know they're going to want to start saving now, because things will come up once they're there, and having a little bit of a cushion or financial safety nest is going to help. The other thing is, we do now have the outside employment policy, and you want to make sure that, one, any position that they're looking at is within the guidelines and parameters of the policy, but make sure that it's not affecting their ability to complete their duties as assigned as a VISTA. So letting them know that that is an opportunity and it's an option that's available really might help make the difference. But even with that additional income, they should still plan to have their own kind of cushion or safety net, even if it just helps them get through, you know, first day on site to when that first paycheck or stipend check comes in. Other than that, finances are always hard. There are emergency funds and emergency situations that CNCS and that intermediaries do have the liberty to help with. Letting your VISTA members know that that is something that's there, and that it's not monopoly money, it's not just there for anything that comes up, but it is an option, really can help ease some of that anxiety, so that they're not letting things get so bad by the time they come and ask for help that it really is kind of hard to get them out of that hole. So being open and honest about what the options are, and then making sure that they're also being responsible and taking ownership of their finances and planning on the front end, but also making sure that they're aware of resources within the community and ways to save money within the community.
Great, thank you, Lonnie. And so we'll go to our last question here. This one came in. This is probably definitely more of a question on a case-by-case basis, but since we mentioned it, I think it was in that example. We did have a supervisor here ask, one thing I saw lately was that some supervisors negotiate lower rents for their VISTAs. Can I get more information on how they did that? So, Lonnie, you as a state office person, and you work with a bunch of different organizations and different sponsors. Have you had any sponsors who've had success in this, and do you know how they went about it? Ellen, I don't know if you with this when you were in that position. I'm just going to put that out there to see if any tips or tricks.
Can you clarify it again one more time? You there was a buzz or something, then I couldn't hear exactly what the question was.
Yeah, sorry about that. The question was, one thing I saw recently, some supervisors negotiate lower rents for their VISTA. Can I get more information on how they did that?
It was the rent that I didn't hear. My experience of that has been around projects that have some sort of leveraged housing along with them. So, for instance, a public housing or a nonprofit that works in the public housing arena or works in housing, period, or in homeless communities. So they already understand and know the housing community within the whether it's a metropolitan area or a rural community in the area that they're already in. So that's one way in which you can do that, and especially if there are multiple VISTA projects within a city, whether it's a big city or a small city. If there's a VISTA project at a housing nonprofit, they can help guide around that. I've heard of people leveraging rental properties from their board members. I've heard of asking the larger community on Craigslist about leveraging a rental property, of course with appropriate screening to ensure that there's safety. So those are just a couple of the creative things that I've heard across some of the VISTA communities. I hope that's helpful. Anybody else?
I don't really have too much. Louisiana is very unique in that most of the people that serve here are more often than not from here, and the program that I manage, at least, that has a lot of individuals that are coming in nationwide, it's through a university, and the university, part of their in-kind is housing. But I have seen the board members, so I think that's a great one because it's a great way to show their buy-in as well. But I think Ellen really nailed it because that one definitely is a case-by-case basis and really probably just comes down to who you know and your resources in the community, and then showing that benefit. If you save them money here, this is what they're contributing to in the long run. So sometimes it just might be a matter of asking the question, but then also showing like the features and benefits of having VISTA in your community to get more buy-in so that you can negotiate those lower rents. We have seen, or I have seen at least, one program, they had it in their budget to offer almost like an assistance offset. So every VISTA member was eligible if they needed it or wanted it to get like $100 towards their rent that was paid directly to the landlord. And again, that was in a very niche intermediary type setting, so I don't know how feasible that is for everyone to do, but that's one other option that we've seen.
Great. Thank you both so much, and thank you all for your really great questions. We know that we're past time, and we do appreciate those of you who could stay to stay, and I hope we answered some of your questions. Definitely, if you leave our webinar here and you still have more questions, please feel free to ask them. On the next slide here, we're going to show you what our next webinar is and how you can ask questions if you have any. So if you do have any further questions, please email us at vistawebinars@cns.gov. And a couple of upcoming webinars. We are going to be doing a sub-site supervisor orientation on November 17th. That'll be in a webinar. So take a look at that and register for that if you'd like. And in December, we're going to be doing strategies for connecting with sites and VISTAs at a distance. So thank you again for your participation. Hope you learned a lot, and we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar.